Next, we're going to take a look at properties and how to create our own. We saw some of the built-in properties that DRM has, and some where we've pulled in from the templates that Oracle has provided. But let's start creating some of our own. So again, if you didn't see the other videos that we have, the properties can be assigned at the version level, the hierarchy level. They can be grouped within property categories like so. And underneath the category can be some specific values. We talked a little bit about the icons and what they mean. We'll go through that as we create the property. So in order to create our own properties, I'm just going to go to the Administer menu here. And this is where we can create property categories, definitions. To make our properties easy to find, I'm just going to create a property category. So I'm going to say New Property Category, and I'm just going to call this Demo. And save that. And now that we have this, we see that demo is up here. And I'm going to create a property by going to New Property Definition. So there are a lot of different boxes and items here. We'll talk through each of them. So the first thing that you will be asked to enter is a property name. Now, one thing to note on the property name is that once you define and assign a name to the property, after you save it, this cannot be changed. So if you call this one thing and then you want to go and change it to something else later on, what you will have to do is physically delete the property, create a new one. It is not very easy to just copy this this node or this property rather, and change the name to it. Whereas with some of the other components that we'll talk through, it is easy to do that, and you can just copy it. But here, it's a little bit more of a challenge. So I highly recommend that you think about what to name a certain property and to make that name as generic as possible in the event that you need to reuse it. I've seen some clients where they named the property, which does, 2 or 3 different things in that single property with a system specific name, right? The system that they were using it for. And then, several years later, they replaced that system but still wanted to keep the property, but didn't want it to reference the old name. So they were forced to keep it with the old system name because if they went and made the change, they would have had to change thousands of components and do a lot of rework. It would have been a project in and of itself just to rename the members and remove the references. So I'm going to create a property here. So I'm just going to create, let's see, I'm just going to create planning data storage. So this is going to be what the data storage value will be in Hyperion Planning. So I'm going to, in my description, say Hyperion Planning data storage, right, as my label. So that's the display, that's the display property here. The description doesn't really get used anywhere. This is just more for if you wanted to explain it. So maybe I'll make my label just planning data storage to make it easier to see. That way it takes up less space. And my description can be Hyperion planning data storage, right? Our property level can be version, hierarchy, global node, or local node. And this controls where will this particular property be shown. So version, if I select version, it is going to only be available when I click on my version and look at those properties. If I set this to hierarchy, it's available at the hierarchy level. If I want it on a member by member level, it is going to either be global node or local node. So global node will have the same property value across all instances of a given node. So if I share that node, all the shared instances will have the same value. If I make it local, every single node can have its own unique value, right? So for something like data storage, this is something where I would want it to be local because I would want the shared instance to be able to be set as shared, right? And the main instance to be set as um, store or never share or label only, etc. Right? So we can also set a default value for that particular member. So for now, I'm just going to say store. My categories, I'm going to assign this to the demo category. And one thing I want to call out about property level, sorry, I didn't mention it before, is that this, like the name, once you set it, you cannot change it. So if we set this to local node and we want to make this global, then we're not going to be able to do that. We would have to delete the property and recreate it. So very important to make sure that the name and the property level are things that you will not change. And we skipped over property type. So there are several different types of properties we can have. Defined is where a user will input a value. Lookup is where we can set a lookup table, where essentially this property value will depend on what another property's value is. So how we can use this is if I'm creating my planning data storage and then I want to create my Essbase data storage, in planning, my data storage is going to be something like store, dynamic calc. In Essbase, it's going to be a single character, so it'll be S for store, X for dynamic calc, O for label only, etc. So we can use a lookup property to say, whatever I enter in as my planning value, it's going to look up and convert to my Essbase value. Just one thing to note on lookup properties, that you cannot put in exceptions to it. So if I enter a planning value of store, but in Essbase I want it to be label only, I wouldn't be able to do that with a lookup property. So we'll have a video on each of these different property types and how to create them and what their limitations are, but I just wanted to call that out. Derived is when you have a formula-based property where you use logic to determine what that property value will be. So DRM supports two types of derived properties. You can do so with a formula, which somewhat resembles like the Excel formula that you use. You can also do a script-based formula where you can write JavaScript. And then the last item here are external lookups. This is where you can have DRM call a web service, or a database function to determine what the value of the property will be. So an example of this, how I've used this in the past, is, for example, say you want someone to be able to enter a zip code and look up what the city and state are. I know a lot of times you enter like a customer address, someone enters the zip code wrong, or they enter the zip code but then enter the city and the state wrong. You can use an external lookup to look up against the U.S. Postal Service database and see, here is what this zip code should be, or based on the zip code, here's what the city and state are. So it's very powerful. We'll show you an example of this later on. And then we have a bunch of different checkboxes down here. So inherited allows you to inherit the value down the hierarchy. So for example, if you set this value at the parent member, it's automatically going to cascade down to each of that member's children. So we're not going to check this box for this example. Overridable, so this is grayed out for defined properties because a defined property by definition allows you to set the value and override it to something else. If you had a derived property where it's built with a formula, this would be an optional checkbox where you can say, only take what the formula calculates or allow a user to override that calculation. List value allows you to set up a defined set of values that a user can select from. I'm going to check that box just for this example here. Hidden does exactly what it sounds. It hides the property from the category. So sometimes you might have some helper properties where you have a single step. You may have a calculation that you don't want anyone to see, and another calculation may be derived off of that. So you can set properties as hidden so that no one will see that particular one. And you can also index values if this is something that will help performance. Off to the right-hand side here, we have, or in the center rather, we have the data type, and there are a ton of different data types that you have here. This will control what the interface will look like. So if I have a string, that's going to be somebody typing in text. If I enter something like a time, you're going to see a time window to adjust the hours, minutes, and seconds. A date will allow you to open up a date picker window and actually click on the month, day, and year in there. Boolean will just be true, false. Integer will allow you to increment, similar to what you see over here for maximum length, minimum length. It'll give you your up, down arrows, etc. And you can also select other nodes in the hierarchy. So a property can reference the name of another node, etc. So we're not going to go through all of these in great length. You can check out the DRM administrator and user guide to look at in depth what each of these do. But mostly, most of the properties that you'll create will be string. Maximum length and minimum length allows you to set exactly that. What is the length of this particular string? So if I wanted to have, let's just say a member name, I can limit to say it can be between 1 character and 80 characters, let's just say. Same thing with aliases. So if you have restrictions on the number of characters that you can put in any particular property, you can use these maximum lengths and minimum length fields in order to control that. And the column width is, how wide the column will be in the user interface. I usually just leave that alone. So for categories, we selected our demo category. Lookup table C is grayed out. This would be available if we set our property type to lookup. And you see we can click this and we can create a key and value pair over there. And you see we also have the lookup property option defined here, where we can say what property are we going to look up, and then the key is what if it's this value, then return what's in our results value field. So we'll go into that. We'll have a deep dive on a lookup property. Derived, if we select this, the parameters tab will will open, and we'll be able to enter the parameters after we save it. And again, we'll be able to choose whether this is using the DRM formula or JavaScript. And the external lookup will open up the external lookup table, and we can select our connection, the operation, and map some parameters here. So again, we'll have in-depth videos on each of these types of properties, so that way you can easily reference what we have. So then if I check this list box, our list values appear here, and we can enter in some different options. So I'm just going to enter a couple just for simplicity here. I'm just going to say store, shared. Obviously there are more. I'm just going to set this for now. And I'll fill in the rest later on. If you want to add in all the different values, if you're following along, feel free to do that. So once I have this set up, I'm just going to click the Save button. And now if we close out of this and we go back to Browse, I'm going to open up my account hierarchy. And what I should see, if I select my dropdown, is that now I have this demo category, and I have a property value in here. So I'm just going to expand this down to my leaf members. See how it's defaulted, so every member is going to be set as store. If I click on that and select my dropdown, I only see two options: store and shared, which is what we wanted. So that's the basics of creating a property. We'll have some more videos on specifically creating different properties. We'll create defined properties, derived properties, lookups, as well as external lookups. So until next time, stay tuned.